Why do we care about singers? Wherein lies the power of songs? Maybe it derives from the sheer strangeness of there being singing in the world. The note, the scale, the chord, melodies, harmonies, arrangements, symphonies, ragas, Chinese operas, jazz, the blues. That such things should exist, that we should have discovered the magical intervals and distances that yield the poor cluster of notes, all within the span of a human hand, from which we can build our cathedrals of sound, is as alchemical a mystery as mathematics or wine or love. Maybe the birds taught us, maybe not. Maybe we are just creatures in search of exaltation. We don't have much of it. Our lives are not what we deserve. They are, let us agree, in many painful ways, deficient. Song turns them into something else. Song shows us a world that is worthy of our yearning. It shows us ourselves as we might be if we were worthy of the world. Hi, I'm Rose Solari, and welcome to the 7th edition of Rose Reads. That gorgeous paragraph is from Salman Rushdie's great novel, The Ground Beneath Her Feet, which is a tremendously gorgeous and moving and tragic retelling of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth, which I thought was a good way to start off today because our theme for the day is the music in poetry and poetry about music. Thank you all for joining me. I am Rose Solari of Alan Squire Publishing, a small press with big ideas. If you've been liking these little live streams we're doing, I do one every Wednesday at 4 p.m. EST. My partner Jimmy Patterson does one every Monday. I hope you will share them, like them, spread them around. You can find us on Twitter at Alan Squire Pub. You can find me on Twitter at Poet Rose. And I hope you'll come and find us and share. We've been thrilled by the reaction we've been getting to these. Thank you so much to those of you who have bought books through these. If you go to our site, alansquirepublishing.com, you'll see that all our books right now are half price. So we're shipping, even though Amazon isn't. So buy books, read books, get through this quarantine. We're going to do it. We're going to get through this together. I wanted to talk about music and poetry today because one of the things that distinguishes poetry as a verbal art form is that it relies upon the sound of it as much as the sense of it to communicate to the reader. I think for many of us, probably the first poems we heard or read or had read to us were in regular forms, sonnets and such. I know for me, one of the poems that my father recited to me often, because I didn't like to go to sleep at night, was Keats' sonnet Bright Star, which begins, "Bright star, would I were steadfast as thou art," which is a lovely way to greet a kid who doesn't want to go to bed. And that sound, now remember, a sonnet is written in iambic pentameter. So an iamb is an unaccented beat followed by an accented beat, right? Da-doom. Da-doom, that's the sound. Pentameter just means that there's 5 of those in a line. So a line in a sonnet goes ba-doom, 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 ba-doom. One of the most interesting things I ever heard said about that was by a professor of mine at Maryland, Reed Whittemore, who was a great poet and William Carlos Williams scholar, who said something. It was one of those things that's so simple, and yet once you hear it, you think, how did I not realize that before? Which is that he felt that the iamb was perhaps the sound closest to human beings because it's the sound of our heartbeat. Because our hearts go ba-doom, ba-doom. You know, as I said, it's one of those things that you think, how did I not realize that before? And then, yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? So I'm going to share with you now a poem of my own that's an unrhymed sonnet. I've written a few of these. Occasionally I work in form, in rhyme, but not often. And this is a poem that is structured like a Shakespearean or an English sonnet, in that there are 3 4-line stanzas and then a 2-line stanza at the end. That's a couplet that kind of turns back on the poem to look at it again. And I think you'll hear the iambs and several other sound considerations in this poem that might help you hear what I'm talking about when I talk about a poem having an ear or a poet having an ear. It's an interesting thing, and I think some people have it innately. Some people have to learn it. But let's hear this poem. And I'm going to share some poems by 3 other poets whose work I really adore today, including Allen Squire Publishing's Reuben Jackson. So we'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, I'm just going to share this little poem of mine with you. It's called Making. And a lot of thought went into the sounds in this one. As if the self is, say, a pile of small bricks, varied in size and color, but all designed, like Lego, to be pieced together in almost innumerable ways. As if you're allowed to trade, as you are in poker, for a different 2 or 3, but never all. As if the play clock, as in football, keeps ticking, getting louder as you build and rebuild first entire walls, and then, more cautious, exchange this door for that, perhaps, never again to knock the whole thing down and just start over. As if the dream of starting over is all you've salvaged from the scramble. That, and how it felt to think you were in charge. So if you think about what I'm saying about sound, the opening line, as if the self is, say, a pile of small bricks. The as if tees you up that this is conjecture, but also those S sounds, self, say, small, bricks. Later, when the pace of the poem picks up, it's because the urgency of the language is picking up and it's revealed in the sound too. As if the play clock, as if in football, keeps ticking, getting louder. And now instead of those soft S sounds, we've got hard sounds, clock, ticking, getting. So this is what I'm talking about music and poetry, how it's not just the sense of the language, but the way the language sounds that's hitting you, whether you even know it or not. I think that's another beautiful thing about poetry, is that it's so much comes into you in ways you don't even fully understand until you reach the end of the poem and feel that ultimate tick. Reuben Jackson is a great poet who many of you are acquainted with, but part of what I think makes Reuben so special is I think he has one of the best ears in contemporary poetry. And I think a lot of that has to do with his background in jazz. Reuben has what I call German Shepherd ears. He hears things in music that other people don't. To sit next to him at a concert and watch his reactions is to get kind of a crash course in how to better hear what the musicians you're listening to are doing. And so I thought I'd share a couple of Reuben's poems and talk about his incredible ear. This is the book of poems that came out from Allen Squire Publishing last fall from Reuben Jackson, called Scattered Clouds. It's his new and selected poems. I was so thrilled to be able to acquire this book for ASP, in particular because Reuben's first book, Fingering the Keys, had been long out of print. It was published by Derek Shue's old press, Gut Punch Press, which was also the press that published my first book. And I know Reuben and I will both be forever grateful to Derek for doing that. But like a lot of small presses, they folded some time back. And I really wanted to get that book into print along with Reuben's newer work. I'm going to start by sharing a poem of Reuben's that is about music, but is also in itself incredibly musical and delightful. I often think that the first line of a poem is kind of like the time signature in a piece of music. It sets up your ear for what's coming. I also think that Reuben is a master of vowels. His vowel sounds are fantastic and communicate so much emotion. And I also think the dynamics in this poem, the way it changes and shifts, are very, very musically influenced and related. Dynamics are so important in any writing. You don't want monotony, right? You don't want the same sound repeating itself. And Reuben makes some wonderful turns here between pathos and humor and pathos again. It's also got a wonderful child's perspective in it that I love. Anyway, this poem is called Second Grade. Let's see what he's got. Second grade. Tried to get my hair to flop like Ringo's so I could impress Sheila Watkins, whose inability to ship kisses to England led her to announce that she'd settle for a reasonable facsimile, provided he could also play drums. I owned a snare and cymbal, 4 adjustable rings. Each day I would try forcing my locks into action, the tight curls forever sleeping. I asked my barber what he could do about this. Aren't you proud of being Negro? He asked. Sure, I answered. But what if Sheila doesn't change her mind? I enjoy so much about that poem. Tried to get my hair to flop like Ringo's, those strong sounds, the consonants and the vowels. And then the simplicity of that language up against a reasonable facsimile. See how the dynamics change? And then back to, I owned a snare and cymbal, 4 adjustable rings. So we're back to, okay, we're thinking this through. I've got the material. And that wonderful turn at, aren't you proud of being Negro? He asks. And Reuben breaks the stanza there. Sure, I answered. Breaks the stanza again. And then, but what if Sheila doesn't change her mind? And how wonderful to end the poem on a question, to take it up and leave us with that. What if? Hanging in the air. I think it's wonderfully mysterious and moving and charming, and just, there's so much to admire in Reuben Jackson's poetry. I hope you will take a look at Scattered Clouds, his new and selected. It's on sale for half price, as all of the books are at Allen Squire Publishing right now. And the other thing I just want to say that I really love about this book, other than all the great poems inside it, is that we asked our book designer, Randy Stannard, to try to approximate in the look and feel of the cover those great classic Blue Note jazz albums from the 70s and 80s. And I think he really did it. I just love it. Anyway, if you're just joining me right now, we're about halfway through today's edition of Rose Reads. I'm Rose Solari from Allen Squire Publishing, a small press with big ideas. I would love, by the way, to hear your ideas for this show. I'd love to know if you've got suggestions, things you'd like to hear us read, things you'd like me to discuss. I would absolutely love to hear what you guys are doing out there and how you're getting through this. And I'd also like to hear from small presses who need support, as we all do. And that brings me to today's featured small press, or actually featured magazine, which is the magazine Fledgling Rag. It comes out once a year. I'm so fond of this magazine and have been for a long time. It's by invitation only. So each issue is really curated. It's put out by Lee Hinton and Lisa Munson, and it's quite a wonderful magazine. And I was so honored that they invited me to be part of this issue, along with some writers whose work I truly love. I have bought, by the way, 20 copies of this issue because I loved it so much. And a few are reserved for friends. But if you order books from Allen Squire Publishing this week, next week, until we run out, I'm going to be tossing a free copy in of this wonderful edition of Fledgling Rag. It's packed with beautiful poetry, and poetry that is very musical. And that takes me to Reuben Jackson again, because Reuben has a poem in this issue. In fact, he has 4. And this is a different kind of music. Reuben's been working on a series that some of you may have seen on Facebook or other places, based on the perspective of a gentleman named Kelly. an older gentleman who muses rather philosophically on the state of the world. And he's an interesting guy. This poem is called Kelly's Self-Portrait, 1968. I drink because I love the idea of something warm and brown sailing south in my throat like a schooner I will name for my imaginary son. The yearning in that, and those long vowel sounds. It's that poem brought tears to my eyes. Another great poem in this from this edition of Fledgling Rag is by Brandon Johnson, poet whose work I also admire very, very much. If you happen to be with us at our book launch at the Writer's Center last fall for our fall titles, you'll know that Brandon did a beautiful job of introducing Reuben Jackson that night to the audience. And Brandon is a wonderful poet in his own right, and I find this poem deeply musical. It's called Practice. And one of the devices that Brandon's using here is a device, again, borrowed from music, which is the use of a refrain. And he does it very powerfully, because the danger with a refrain is that we'll get bored, right? If it happens too much, or if it's too predictable in where it's placed, we'll lose a bit of our attention. But Brandon manages to string this tension along throughout to a really, really powerful ending. Practice. Children, every day we tell you to do things, and you take issue. We send you to school to get your brains pushed and shoved, and you hear this, get told that, and by your actions you tell us what you've learned. Your throats begin to use phrases I hope will stay with you. As much as they annoy me, I want you to keep on saying them. Learn the right measure of air for your lungs. Learn the proper shape for your lips, your tongue, the size of your heart. Now, release. That's not fair. No, that's not right. When you're called to pick up arms against anything, not physically endangering you or yours, I want to hear you let loose in the same manner as when I tell you to pick up your room. I want you to know how to say it. I want you to know why you're saying it, because one day you'll need to know how and when to say, that's not fair. No, that's not right. Whether it's in a classroom with a teacher and it's about Selma or Ferguson, whether it's lunchtime with classmates and it's about Montgomery or Boston, Mass., whether it's at the dance or the cookout or against a bully, be ready to say, that's not fair. No, that's not right. If it's Arkansas or Arizona, New York or Chicago, D.C., Sanford, South Carolina or Cleveland, be prepared to say it, know how to say it, then cast your voice across the air. That's not fair. No, that's not right. Make governments and men answer the same question you ask your parents. Why? You and your friends, join voices with a world of young people. Let there be a chorus of, that's not fair. No, that's not right. Learn how to yell it as loud then as you do now. Practice it with all the bass your body will allow. So fond of Brandon's work. He's got a couple of beautiful books of poems out there. I highly recommend his work, and also this issue of Fledgling Rag. You can find in the comments how to buy it. Lisa and Lee are donating 100% of the proceeds from this issue to a charity in Lancaster. What a great thing to do. They made this beautiful issue and they're giving it all away. So I urge you to visit the site, buy a magazine, spread the love. Another great poem in this issue is by Ellen Aronofsky Cole. True confession, Ellen was a student of mine at the Writers' Center and at Politics and Prose. I take no credit for her brilliance, but I do feel proud of her. This is called No Ghazal. A ghazal is an Arabic verse form that was embraced in medieval Persia and has been embraced in other places. It's comprised of couplets, and each couplet concludes with the same word. It's also traditional that in the last couplet, the poet's name appears. Now, it's a form, so some of the music is required by the form. But Ellen always had, from the first time she showed up in my class, a really wonderful ear for the music of language, perhaps because she's also an actress. So she's good at performing, and performing relies so much on rhythm and musicality. I just am very impressed by this beautiful poem of hers, and we'll share it with you. No Ghazal. At Hanukkah, I never asked for anything selfish. No gelt, just one or two little toys. A Ginny doll, or maybe plastic high heels. If no requested gifts arrived but socks, I said thank you so strongly with lots of hugs and kisses. I couldn't bear for anyone to know I was unhappy. In college, Maxine didn't like me because I was so dramatic. She knew everything I said was false, which wasn't true, or sometimes was. With boys, I was even worse. Like Addo Annie, I couldn't say no. Lying in bed with a redhead named Mark, I thought if you make up your mind to never argue or tell someone no, who knew? You might never have to be alone. That theory turned out to be a big, fat mistake. No kismet, no honey, zero luck. Until in the sensitivity group in dorm B, when I slapped a blonde guy with a peace sign patch on his knees, and no kidding, he showed up at my room that night because when I hit him, he felt something new, something he knew he'd never felt before. He stayed with me 5 years. Little Ellen Aronofsky, who'd never been in love, not even once. Did it last? No. Just so well handled and well navigated. The turns she takes. She said she knew everything I said was false, which wasn't true, or sometimes it was. The way she keeps swerving and dodging and moving through the subject matter, she keeps the form constantly unpredictable. You're constantly off your feet. It's just an excellent job. Ellen has a first book out right now, and I hope you'll go find that too. She's a really special poet and a really beautiful person as well. I'm going to wrap up with a poem of my own. Oops, I better get that issue back because I've got 4 poems in here as well, and I'm going to read you one of them to close out today. Thank you all so much for listening again. As I said, we really appreciate those of you who've been coming to the website, buying books, showing up for these videos and live readings. If you like them, tweet them, share them. We're on Twitter at Alan Squire Pub. I'm on Twitter at Poet Rose, which I haven't mentioned much, but I have a lot of fun on social media, as some of you who follow me on Facebook and Twitter know. Or as I like to say, come for the poetry and music, stay for the Sean Bean gifts, because there really is a Sean Bean gift for every occasion. And the animal videos. I'm weak for animal videos these days. All right, I'm going to conclude with this poem. This is called Coltrane in Spring. I have a really deep love for certain eras of jazz music that you will hear about in this poem. And one of the ways I know that Reuben Jackson has German Shepherd ears is that the first time he saw me read, I mean, like in the 80s, maybe, he came up to me afterwards and said, "Do you like Miles Davis?" And I said, "Oh, God, I love Miles Davis. I listen to him when I write all the time." And he said, "I can hear it." kind of astonishing, He also gave me great advice about this poem. I showed an earlier draft of Coltrane in Spring to Reuben, and it had an opening line that he suggested I cut. The opening of this poem used to be, "First times are important, so let's start with Steve." And Reuben said, "Why don't you cut first times are important? It's already there." And again, it makes me think of music. It's like he was telling me I might have needed that line to warm up. And goodness knows I enjoy hearing an orchestra warm up, but that's for before the performance. When the performance starts, the poem starts. And he was right, as he so often is. And I'm really grateful to Lee and Lisa for publishing this poem, for publishing all four of the poems they published in this issue, but this one in particular, because it's a challenging thing to write about an artist of the magnitude of Coltrane, of the great genius status. And so I had to remind myself throughout that I'm not capturing the magnificence of what he does. I'm capturing my experience of the magnificence of what he gave us. And that gave me permission to write the poem. It's in 3 parts, like a love supreme. Coltrane in Spring. 1. Let's start with Steve, for whose life certain kinds of jazz were as necessary as food or sleep or sex, and who never lectured but listened in his studio and his funky work week crash pad to the music of Miles Davis, Charles Mingus, John Coltrane. So one Friday night in spring, the usual crowd assembled at some rooftop bar. We shook our heads at the piped-in pop and split for his fridge full of Amstel Light, his swank sound system. He slid the record from its jacket. I lit the joint I'd carried all day in my jeans pocket. He set the needle down. Somehow, he knew I could not talk and hear this, so we sipped and smoked in library quiet, even when he got up to flip sides, pop 2 more beers. When it was over, my skin electric with the beginning of a new idea, one I thought that might change everything. I said, "What was that?" And Steve said, "Exactly." 2. Because if you dig it all out at once, the blast might blind you. Because chaos cannot resolve without a fight. Because we have to go down to go up. Because if music might make you a wiser, more sacred being, this was, for me, at that time, that music. Because everyone kneels for something. Go find the right thing. 3. Steve had one last big show, packed up his paints, and moved to New Jersey, took over the family business. His old studio on 9th Street is long gone. And the rest of the usual crowd dispersed, other lives, other countries, and some turned too soon to ash. As for me, today it is spring again, all the windows open, and I am washing the dishes and praising the return of the light when a love supreme comes on the radio, and all at once I'm that girl again, hearing this music for the first time, all awe and exalted wonder, and at the start of so many adventures, except that I'm not. The distance between this woman and that girl thrums like a fat, insistent bass line, intent on breaking my heart. And then from outside, a robin sings back to Coltrane his own 4-note refrain, down, up, down, up. And for a while, man and bird keep tossing that sequence of sound back and forth, as if together they just uncovered the first song, the one we all knew in the moment before we were born. Thanks for listening today. Thanks to the folks at Fledgling Rag. Thanks to Reuben Jackson, Brandon Johnson, and Ellen Cole for their beautiful poems. I'm Rose Solari, poet, fiction writer, reviewer, and co-founder of Allen Squire Publishing, a small press with big ideas. These are all archived, not only on Facebook, but on our site and on YouTube. Come find us, join us, Twitter us, follow us. We love you. You're getting us through this time, and I hope we're helping you to get through as well. And as I said, please send suggestions for new shows, more stuff you'd like to hear about. I'll see you next Wednesday in this time slot. We're going to swim to the other side of this virus, folks, and we're going to meet up again in person and love our work and love each other. Hang in there. I'm thinking of you. Have a great night.